What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations, and this is the place for Epic Conversations. It is not the Dr. Vibe Show today. I've been pleasure and honor to host, and I have hosted a few conversations in regards to the International Decade for People of African Descent that was declared by the United Nations, and it runs from 2015 to 2024. I'm blessed to be hosting these conversations on behalf of the African Diasporic Action Team. And we have the lead voice of ADAT here with us today. Susan, how are you today, Susan?
I'm pretty good, Dr. Vibe. Thank you for asking. How about yourself?
I am blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. We also have Soraya Lemure, who's the Director of Communications and Programming for the Michelle Jean Foundation via phone. How are you today, Soraya?
I'm well, thank you.
Good, and I really would like to thank Soraya last minute coming in and helping us out in regards to translation en français to this conversation. So it's appreciated and not taken for granted.
Thank you.
Great.
You're welcome.
My pleasure. Today's conversation topic, or this month's conversation topic, is about how to get Black or Canadian organizations to take advantage of opportunity. And when I give that title to both of you ladies, what does that mean to you? How to get Black Canadian organizations to take advantage of opportunity? Soraya, since you're via phone, you go ahead first.
Okay, so I will translate that. Can I do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Donc, le but de la conversation, c'est vraiment de savoir comment est-ce qu'on renforce les communautés noires pour qu'elles savent plutôt comment prendre avantage des opportunités.
Wonderful. So, wonderful translation. What are your thoughts when I just shared our topic today? What were your initial thoughts when you heard about the topic?
And I think it's actually interesting because a lot of times, it's a double-edged sword, like we say. A lot of times the information don't come to the Black community, but a lot of times as well, because we haven't been into those spaces so often that we do not know how to take advantage of opportunities that are given to us. That's all I can say for that.
Okay. And Susan, what are your thoughts initially on this conversation piece? Because I know this was something you were very passionate that you wanted to share about with our audience today.
I think for me, it really embodies the work that so many people are doing, so many people that have gotten us to this place. In the fact that as Black people in Canada right now, we have an unprecedented opportunity to do something great. So this conversation for me highlights that, the fact that we want everybody to jump in, everybody to bring their efforts, their passions, and let everybody know what everybody else is doing, so that together we can take the most advantage of this decade.
Okay, fantastic. Now I'm wondering. Okay, we're going to get right into an important conversation that happened recently with a number of.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
It's Soraya speaking. I'm not able to hear other people speak.
Okay. All right. So I will just remember that as we continue to do our conversation. So Soraya and Susan, just want to make sure that you can hear me clearly, and then I will be the go-between between all the conversations. So I have a lot on my plate, but we're going to get it done. One of the things that Susan mentioned, Soraya, is that one of the things that makes her think about is the work with our ancestors and how much they have done to get us to the place we are today. So my first conversation piece would go back to a meeting that was just held recently in July, where a number of African Canadian organizations were represented across Canada. So Susan, can you talk about that meeting first with our audience? What was the gist of that meeting? How did it come about?
Actually, Dr. Vibe, before I talk about that, would you indulge me and allow me to read the UN Decade of African Statement of Truth?
Okay, you can certainly read the UN Decade African Statement of Truth.
Okay, so this is speaking truth to the Black settlers' experiences. And for our meetings, we are trying to incorporate reading this statement of truth at the beginning or at the end, and it is really basic, and everybody can adapt it for all our meetings in all our spaces. So it goes something like this. And Soraya, sorry, because it's last minute, I didn't get a chance to forward you the French version of it. But here we go in English. Our significant presence and contributions on this land predate the country of Canada by over 150 years. Indeed, up until 1961, over half of all Black people in Canada were Indigenous to Canada. Indigenous settlers to Canada includes your ancestors. Learn of that. Our sweat, skills, experiences, and contributions taken and used without consent and for free build.
Okay, unfortunately, we lost Susan for a minute, but what we're going to do is I'm going to switch back to Soraya. You were at this meeting on July 25th, and could you give us a little background about this meeting?
Yes. So essentially, the UN DPAD, along with many organizations. Maybe I should go back a bit further. Starting with the Black Canadian Summit. So the National Black Canadian Summit, which is a summit an annual summit now for Black communities to get together to share recipes for success, as well as discussing different concerns or issues that are going on among our communities. So at the end of the last day of that summit this year, a lot of people went on Parliament Hill, where they met. They had a face-to-face. Donc ils ont rencontré avec des ministres et tout ça to discuss those issues that were raised during the summit. And the continuation to this is to say, well, okay, so we know what the concerns are, we know what the issues are. How are we going to work with the government to ensure that to reduce the disconnection that exists between governmental institutions, and grassroots organizations? Because a lot of times those issues are not resolved, and those concerns perpetuate because there's no conversation between the government and grassroots organizations. So that's the work essentially that we were doing on July 21st when talking to ESDC, when we talked about making sure that there's a new model now going forward to reduce that disconnection between the government and grassroots, that we select intermediary organizations that will be able to respond to the issues or tackle the issues with Black communities, and as well as reporting to the government to make sure that there's always a transparency when dealing with Black communities, because that was one of the biggest issues that were raised this year, is that there's this disconnect. Now, on July 23rd, many organizations were invited to go to come to Ottawa, to Gatineau rather, and talk about strategies. How are we going to do that? What works best for us? And what are the organizations that we can say are strong enough to represent the interests of the Black community when talking to the government? So that's what July 23rd was all about. So it's kind of getting together to see how we can move the needle forward together. Donc, c'était une opportunité pour nous de se rencontrer, de travailler ensemble et de savoir comment est-ce qu'on allait continuer à travailler ensemble en impliquant le gouvernement, justement. Because the government now has a 25 million, well, EDSC, I should say, has a budget of $25 million and they're looking to reallocate to community building and capacity building among the Black communities. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are, like you were saying, to go back to your question, that we know how to of those opportunities. That way we don't have to come together again next year and in 2 years and sit down and have those same conversations we were having.
Okay, fantastic. Did everyone get a chance? Did everyone get a chance to hear that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to, before we go forward, like to welcome Sylvia. Welcome, Sylvia, again. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Vide. Thank you. I'm well. I'm glad to be on and sharing this conversation about the exciting stuff happening with the federal government, and and contextually what we did has Black community organizations across the country to get ourselves to that position. So yeah, thanks for hosting this.
My pleasure. And then a gentleman who I've known for a minute, a minute, a second, an hour. Robert, how are you, my man? Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing, man?
Good. Well, I'm glad
Thanks
you have
for having
time.
me on.
You're always on the go. So for you to take time out of this, out of your positive, productive schedule, I am honored.
Okay, thanks.
Well, good stuff. Well, I'm glad that you've joined the conversation. I know we could talk a little bit more about the 25th, but you know what? I'm going to parking lot that just for a bit, because I think that we have enough people in our conversation right now to enlarge, just talk about, getting Black Canadian organizations to take advantage of opportunity. So is it the feeling of everyone here? How do we do this? Is there a need to do it? Now, do we have to do it? And who are the right people to do it? So people can just jump in on whatever they want, because I know there's going to be a rich conversation. So, how do we do this? How do we do the empowerment? How do we get this party started?
So Sylvia, if I could join in or jump in, I guess. So I think one of the things is to kind of continue to go forward with the process that we've been doing. So I know that Susan started to read what kind of our values piece that we have. And when we're talking about so there's the UN push, folks who have been at this for a while. There's the Meeting of the Minds folks, and these organizations have been like expanding and expanding as we use our own kind of variety of ways of promotion, of which this vehicle is one. And thank you again for hosting. And then we go through our network, and it's kind of like there's this part of that growing thing where you tell someone and they tell someone and all this stuff, because we want to get as many folks engaged as possible, and to be kind of coming from a good foundation. So additional to having those values piece or statement, that's where we also have principles that are also acknowledged at each meeting, which, have a range of components in it. They talk about we want to be transparent. We want to grow ourselves in a way that situates us well. So there's governance and all those kinds of things in place. So we've got like a lot of things already underway that we want to be respectful of, our language diversity and the culture connections that come with that. So I think we're really like well situated. And when we were able to get to that space with the government folks and show them that we already have these connections from coast to coast, that we have organizations that, kind of are also in this range of continuum. They're kind of been around for a while, have their governance structure, and the grassroots ones that are around as well. So again, demonstrating there's an understanding and appreciation of our diversity within our diversity in many ways. So I think in terms of kind of, we're halfway through the decade, right? And people have been pushing behind the scenes and in front to help the governments, federal and provincial, municipal probably as well, to recognize that stuff. So, but we want to make sure that we are using our collective strength to move some initiatives forward. And so when we've taken advice in our conversations about what our needs are, it being able to have organizations which have been called intermediaries in terms of a name that works with government, be able to take, those funds and help us distribute them out across the country to have kind of something that's national in scope. The Institute that's been talking about that. It's been, has a great foundational piece connected with CAFCAN and stuff. So there's a lot of kind of structured things in place. And if everybody doesn't know them, we're working to work together to make sure that everybody knows them so that they're all in a conversation and contributing to it in that regard. So I think we're kind of well there. The last thing I'll say before I leave the floor to others is the 25 million is what's attached to the decade and, kind of, narrowly aligned, I guess I'd say it in that way. But there is funding in all other areas within the government that may have an attachment directly to Black community. But because we are Canadians, we should think about ourselves accessing those funds that are for all Canadians, right? Like we talk about ourselves here in Nova Scotia as First Peoples in the sense about we're the Black Canadians who have been here since 1600s and forward. We're also Canadians in that way about resources that are supposed to be accessible to Canadians in government. So I say, our pieces of the various pies that exist, we also need to kind of think about that in terms of sustainability and advancement in ways that, as I said, recognize our uniqueness and the importance of the government honoring that, and also value us as Canadian citizens.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do, Sylvia, I'm going to get you to leave because I have Richard Sharp that wants to come on, but don't leave the room because I'll probably ask you to come back in. Oh, is that fair?
Mm-hmm, sure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So Robert, what do you feel needs to be done in regards to getting Black Canadian organizations to take advantage of opportunity?
Well, I think the greatest advantage of taking the opportunity is to realize that you're being provided with $25 million to educate your community about what's presently about the international decade for people of African descent, and use March 25th as a catalyst for them to realize what the impact of the slave trade and what that had on the victims of the slave trade. But while we attempt to get funding on a high level with respect to organizations implementing certain programs, we really can't forget about impacting the person on the ground, right? And having programs that don't reach impoverished communities, our impoverished communities across Canada. So we have to go high level with respect to having apps created that would advance the international decade and people recognizing it and the government levels. But also, we really can't forget about the average Black person on the street and how to reach them, because some of them don't even have internet access, right? So if we're just gearing it towards that, we're working with the assumption that they have internet capability and that they're even capable of logging into the show, right? Even knowing it properly, because even sometimes in meetings, we have people who you can tell haven't done it before. And this type of technology has been around for a good 5, 6, 7 years. But yeah, you can tell that there are people that if you tell them to mute their phone, they still don't know how to do it, right? So we're dealing with that type of variance in our community along social and political lens, right?
Good, John. And let me just properly, it's Robert Small who is sharing with you, and we had Sylvia Paris on before that. Susan, want to come back to you in regards to getting Black Canadian organizations to take advantage of opportunity. Richard will get to you in just a moment, but I wanted to get Susan back in the conversation because I see Susan has notes, and I don't want her to I want to make sure she gets as much as possible for her notes to share with our audience. So Susan, please do share.
No, the notes are for the following things. But in terms of getting organizations to take advantage, I think this is where we're going to have to get bigger organizations that have been there, that know how to do this, to pair up with the younger organizations. So mentorship opportunities. really building trust within our organizations and helping organizations to set themselves up to be able to meet the standards. Because we have a lot of small organizations, grassroots organizations that are doing tremendous amount of work in their various communities. So I think this is going to be an opportunity for us to find a way to bring everybody together, so that the small organizations can be partakers or build the capacity to get them to be recognized for the good work they're doing in individual communities.
Okay, good stuff. Well, Mr. Richard Sharp, you are with us. I know your time is tight, so we'll let you in and make the most of the time that you have available with us today.
Yeah, I'll only say a couple of comments real quick before I jump off. I'm taking my son off to college this afternoon, so we're all very excited to get in the car. So I told him all to wait while I jump on the call for just a few minutes, just to echo some of the things that Robert and Susan were saying about taking advantage of these opportunities. I'm very happy to have been part of work that was done on the 23rd of July here in Ottawa with about 36 Black organizations from across the country to secure that $45 million for us for capacity building to support that money, the Institute, and to be feeling quite confident that we're going to see some progress for our people as a start to engage with the government to be able to access this money and use it to the benefit of our communities. It's I find it, I'm a former, well, I'm not former, but I'm out of government right now on an exchange with community. But for me, being part of government for like 24 years, to see something like this happen within my work lifetime is pretty amazing. And there've been some amazing people around the table that have helped make this happen, from our people on the inside of government, from some of the politicians who have been supporting us, like Greg Fergus and members of Parliament Black Caucus, Kath Can, Floydine, Charles, Frida Friedel, and Sylvia, who were part of the initial proposal that went up to on the Institute, and a woman by the name of Helen Ofoso, who helped write the original draft that became part of that work. There's been so many people that got together to get that work done. Lastly, in terms of making sure that there is a system in place for Black communities to access those funds, there was a system that was put in place on the 23rd that Black communities present agreed to. Black communities agreed to. I'm being ushered to the car.
Okay, no problem.
But lastly, Black people that we agreed to was really historic. We had a chance as Black people to sit around the table, many tables, with government officials there from a number of departments, and we behaved in a way that people saw that we were organized and together and smart and committed to making sure that this happened. So they could not help but say yes. So we're, as part of the UN Push Coalition, we're going to be engaging other departments in a similar way. We're going to be pulling some of the community folks into some of those senior level meetings here in Ottawa and by phone to keep pushing on various levels to make sure that we get the best out of the decade. So so that's my quick spiel.
No problem.
Thank you, Dr. Vibe, for giving us the platform, and hope to catch up with you guys in the next call.
All right. Well, travel safe.
Thank you.
All right. Be well. All right. So I'm going to come back. Soraya, people have had some comments. I want to ask a little bit of a concern here from where I sit. It's wonderful. It's wonderful that government has put aside this money, but we know that governments can change, and there's an upcoming federal election. So should Black Canadians, African Canadians be putting all their eggs in one basket, or should they also be trying to get funding monies from the private sector?
That's a very interesting question that you're asking right now, because I think one doesn't invalidate the other. And yes, we should think about diversifying our sources of funding for capacity building and community building. So yes, governments do change, but that's why also in regards to taking advantage of opportunities, we also need to learn to hold government accountable because it's our tax money paying for that. It's our we're contributing to that government, right? So we need to know that we need to hold the government accountable. And yes, governments do change, and that's why it's so important for us to always be in the know of whenever a funding is made available to our communities, we need to be really going after it and making sure that what needs to be done is done so that whenever there's a change of government, once again, we do not fall victim of just, not receiving the funding or the next government not seeing the value behind this funding or anything of that nature. Now, when it comes to the private sector, we need to be informed because a lot of times what happens is that we are not sure who we're supporting. A lot of times they're private sector and they have this this idea about, social enterprise and they're willing to fund us, but also looking into, are they hiring Black people? Are they supporting Black businesses? Are they making sure that, we don't always depend on the private sector? Because the thing that happens with the private sector is once we start depending on it, we'll fall into the same trap with the government. That means the CEOs of those companies that are, funding us and super happy to do so will just find themselves continuously wanting to fund us, so therefore not looking to empower us. So when it comes to that, maybe what we should think about doing, if we're doing both, if we're taking funding both from the private sector and the public sector, deciding that, I don't know, maybe from the money that comes from the public sector, let's think about investing it within our own community. And so the money that comes from the private sector just contributes to uphold whatever we already have built, because that's the dangerous trap that we often fall into, is that, we overly depend on whatever source of funding that is. And we need to make sure that whenever we're taking money or we're accepting money or money given to us, that we're directing this money to capacity building for long-lasting results, for long-term results, for sustainability. Because no matter where it comes from, that should be our priority.
Okay, I'll open that comment up to everyone to respond to, because as I said, governments come and go, and as we all know, there's an upcoming federal election, and I just wonder what's going to happen to that millions of dollars if there's a change in government.
Well, the question, to answer your question bluntly, is that I can't say they will. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. But what usually happens is that if the money is not taken advantage of, speaking of taking advantage of opportunities, they just reallocate the money to a different portfolio.
Right.
And that's what happened last year with the Black Youth Action Plan for Ontario, right? They promised $48 million over 5 years, but I'm assuming, I don't want to assume, but let's say maybe not enough black individuals or Black people from different Black communities said, okay, here's a strategic action plan for that. So they maybe, there was probably no value behind it. So now they're calling it a multicultural fund. So that means it goes to anyone who's a person of color. So right now, once again, our voices are being silenced. We're not the priorities once again, and we're not able to take advantage of that money that was allocated to us. So so in terms of what do we do when there's a change of government? In order to prevent that from happening, is to take advantage right away. Is to build a national advisory board or anything of that nature that will say, okay, we know this funding is coming down the line. We know we're going to have access to this within 2 months. This is what we're going to do with it. right? So we always need to make sure that we always have an action plan whenever there's a funding that's made available. Because if there's no action plan, that's when they can say, oh, okay, we're gonna retrieve that funding. It's not gonna be made available for that specific group anymore. So that's one thing. And maybe the second thing as well is on a continuum with that conversation, is to say, if there's an action plan, if we have enough capacity to how can I say this, to make sure that this action plan is put into action, at the risk of sounding very redundant, but is that so we can only hold the government accountable if we have an action plan and they just decide out of nowhere to just cut that funding, right? So now what we need to do in order to prevent whenever there's a change of government for us to lose that money, to always have this body of this advisory body that's available to us that we can say, okay, this is what we're planning on doing, and these are the actions and milestones that we're doing, or that we're ce sont les objectifs que nous allons viser in order to take advantage of that funding. So once that's done, I think that can reduce the anxiety that comes around a change of government, because governments will come and go, but if internally as a community we have the capacity to always make sure that we're taking advantage of those fundings that are being made available to us, rarely but sometimes it happens, then we would have less worries around us, right? So
Okay.
that would be my answer.
So
and I want other people now to jump in. So Sylvia, and I also want Susan's take on this, and Robert's also, and also anyone in the chat room. I'd like to thank everyone watching on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope. Get vocal. Keep the comments coming. Go ahead, Sylvia.
yeah, so the urgency of having this meeting happen with the federal government people, it really goes to your question, right? In terms of that, so we were able to bring to the government and have be endorsed structures that would guard against this kind of, passing into being able to support having the resources out into community organizations prior to, in this case, to the upcoming election. So the intermediaries, the organizations that were talked about there, that is a language around government, which is basically having Black organizations in various parts of the country who demonstrate kind of meeting the government criteria, with the additional pieces that came from our meeting on July 23rd, that they can be one place to have to hold that money, and then proposals and things can go through those. And the institute, right? The Canadian Institute for People of African Descent, that larger kind of right now concept body. So both of those things got developed in conversations with organizations, grassroots, people that identified as grassroots, individual, as well as kind of more structured ones. And it was endorsed at the meeting. So all the 36 whatever folks, organizations that were there endorsed it. So I think in terms of that piece around being able, in this particular case, in terms of accessing those 25 million, we've got structures in place that are ready for that, and we're continuing those meetings with folks to help kind of when we're ready. So just for what was said in terms of Soraya around kind of an action plan. So there is that structure framework in place that also allows for the specific themes that people identify. And that might be regional connected, or it might be a national thing. But we've heard about the need for data and data segregation. We've heard about the need to address the justice issues. We've heard about other ones. So just a couple examples. So we're ready. We're ready to take that money in terms of a structure from government where they can talk about their accountability from their perspective, and we can talk about accountability from a community, civil society organization perspective. And I think, as was said too, things should be thought about in multiple approaches. So in terms of connecting with private organizations, generally they come on around something that cross connects with their mandate and their project specific. we can utilize that too. As I was saying earlier, I think that this money, the UN decade money, is our money. It's the Black Canadians' money. So the 1.2 million of us that exist, like that's what that's for. But as I said before, in terms of kind of leveraging that or doing other things, we are Canadians. And so anything that's set aside for various initiatives, we should feel like we can access as well. So I think it's very also important to reaffirm what was said about we need to see ourselves as with the agency that we have and being able to take action. And we don't have to wait like for a proposal to come out on something. We can say, this is to governments. This is what needs to be done. Here's how we know it needs to be done. And really understand ourselves as being able to be our first person voice experts, which we are in the things that we need for ourselves, for theme areas, sectors, and for our community overall. So I think that we are situated there for that money to not go astray. And we've been working really hard and diligently on that. And people have been supporting each other with support letters on different projects and trying to share out any information that we can. And I think if we keep, demonstrating to the government, which I think we have through these various kind of initiatives, we are in a collective voice on this. We have our own individual things that we need to focus on, and all that type of stuff. We don't have to throw away who we are, individual organization or individual person, but we do know that we have a power of the collective, and we know that there's common themes that we want to address together.
Robert?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Sylvia mentioned, right? That we don't have to, just because there's 25 million being given over here, we shouldn't all just, on the left, we all shouldn't just run over to the left and then wait until there's something happening on the right to try getting that, right? That we should really just look for opportunities in general and realize that we don't have to wait until something specific comes out for us to be applying to the corporate sector or the private sector or angel investors and such. And going back to what Sylvia was mentioning, that yes, there'll be regional identity, and let's say money's given out to different organizations in Halifax. There's nothing stopping once that initiative is off the ground. I don't think that there's anything stopping an organization in Halifax or Toronto from looking from corporate to corporate sponsors to support that initiative, right? So, because what happens oftentimes, and specifically with the Ontario Black Youth Action Plan, as a case example, you're given all this money and people use it for programs, but some of these programs are not sustainable because they've never tried getting the corporate buy-in or even private buy-in to keep these programs sustainable, whether or not there's funding or not, right? And with respect to the Black Youth Action Plan, yes, unfortunately, that should have been a rallying cry for us to support the Liberals, really, right? Because the other two parties are not offering you anything, and the Black Youth Action Plan, they're now giving you out money to help your community. So unless you can think of a reason that's greater than 48 million to vote against the Liberal Party, I think getting 48 million is a pretty good incentive when it's aimed towards your community. Like, you would have to think of a very good reason outside of that to say that, hey, I don't want to vote for that party because they're giving people that look like me in my community 48 million, but I'm not going to vote at all. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? It's almost foolish, really, right?
Right.
So it was kind of like a shake your head, and people have to realize that you're getting in that by voting, there's power, and the people that vote get what they want because guess what? They're voting. But if you're not voting, that's even a bigger statement than you realize, because you're basically telling politicians that you don't care who rules you. And you don't care who rules you, that you'll just deal with the chips whenever they fall. So they really don't have to pay attention to you if you don't vote. Like, you're not something that they should even pay mind on because you're not voting. So why spend money on you to sway you either way because you're not willing to vote? And oftentimes, when I'm in Black communities, they'll say that they're not voting. I go, well, guy, that's not you. No one cares if you're not voting. If anything, sometimes people are glad that you're not voting because they know that you'll vote for the other party and not for them anyway. You know, so when it gets right down to it, we just have to be actively involved in various political parties, the same way other communities are involved in several parties, because some of us think more right wing, more left wing, more NDP-ish on various issues. But if all those candidates have the center core that they want to help the Black community, I can deal with a conservative for 4 years if they're trying to help the Black community in a conservative way, however that's defined, or an NDP way if that's defined, or a liberal way, because I know they can be swayed in some way, shape, or form, because we're sharing that willingness to help the Black community at our center core. But if we have all politicians that don't have that at their center core, then we're really just waiting for people to tell us what to do and how they're going to define the money allotted to us. And that's why with a Black Youth Action Plan, as the first person mentioned, that now it's multicultural, and I've seen that happen several times before.
Okay.
It's unfortunate.
Thanks for your input, Robert. Susan, what do you think? There's been a lot of great commentaries. I know that you can add on to what has been shared already.
I think besides what has been shared already, or just really to reiterate the same thing, this is to become a unified, to present a unified front. I think gone should be the days where each organization is doing their own thing, because now if not only for these funds, but also going forward, we need to find the things that unite us as a Black community, and find ways to collaborate. This is why this work that we are doing, even with this poll, disseminating this information, this is what makes it so important, so that our communities, whether small, like 2 people organizations or big organizations, if we all come together and support each other, then we will present as a strong voice. And if we present as a strong voice, it should really help us to take advantage of not only this, but even if the governments change, we will still be a block of people to be reckoned with, and now we can move our collective agenda forward, which will in turn move all the communities forward. So without repeating whatever everybody has said, this is, I think, we are on a good point right now, on a good spot where, as I said, organizations are supporting each other. I see letters of support coming through, smaller organizations being helped by bigger organizations. I think we have an opportunity to make sure that not only this opportunity, but every other opportunity that exists for Canadians as a whole, we can also be partakers of it, because at the end of the day, we are as Canadian as the other people next to us.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that great information. I'm just going to see if we can get another guest joining us via phone. So she should be with us in just a moment. And as always, there's a lot of great comments coming on all the platforms. I'm just going to wait our next guest via phone to join us. And if she doesn't in the next few moments, we have 2 or 3 questions from the YouTube platform. So just waiting to see if we get this person on here. Okay. I don't. 4211. All right.
Reached the confidential voicemail of Floydine Charles Strider, Executive Director at Capital.
Okay, so unfortunately, she's not with us at the moment. So we'll move on. So I'm gonna. There's some questions here from the YouTube platform that I'm gonna have everyone take a listen to and see if they can provide their feedback. So Ann Clark is asking from YouTube: has an organization been chosen based on the criteria recommended by the government on the 23rd of July? What about the capacity of the Federation of Black Canadians at this point to be that institution or the Michel Jean Foundation? Anyone want to address that comment or that question? Okay.
I think,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh,
Thank you.
I don't know yet.
Because yeah, what we were.
I know there's
Oh.
to follow and to it shouldn't be a long process, but we're still, I mean, it's still just about a month after that. So yeah, so what we did is that during that meeting, there was a part where we were asked to come together as, you know, to create work groups where we would decide and give our ideas around who would be best suited based on those criteria to be selected. So we have provided that list to the government. So we're just waiting to get back. They are supposed to reach out to the groups that were provided, that were suggested by the Black communities. And now we're just waiting to hear back from them to see what's the next step. But they do have a list, a short list, let's say, selected by people who were in that room on that day to know who or which organizations fit into the criteria to become an intermediary organization.
Okay, Sylvia, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think that just was the same thing, and I think I'd only add on to that. I think there was also opportunity for the government to take the criteria that we kind of confirmed at the meeting and use that not only with making decisions from the collective recommendations, but if in organizations separately had submitted themselves, they would be able to go through that same kind of process.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. We'll get another question here from the YouTube platform. Robin Brown has a comment here. Elders involved in the former National Black Coalition of Canada said the number one reason it failed was the reliance on government funding. Are Black folks willing to fund initiatives that benefit them? Good question. Who wants to go at that first?
Well, yeah, I'll say that, you know, like oftentimes when people say that something failed, right? You know, that one, the reason why it fails is sometimes we don't learn from what other people have done and we don't know the history of it. So yes, I know the name that he's mentioning just by name, but I don't know who was involved, the history, what steps they took, how they undertook them. So I can read that and say, hey, when I'm on a platform, when someone's suggesting the same thing that other people have done, I can consider that, yeah, it might have failed with them in 1982 or 1987, but can this idea work now, right? So oftentimes in our organization, we're not operating from a framework where we can learn from elders' mistakes, because the elders don't document what happened or tell people what occurred, right? So and also we have access to tools now that we didn't have in a generation like 20 years ago. You know, with the internet, this conversation could not happen, you know, 20 years ago, the way that it's happening now. You know, so the capacity is different than it was 20 years ago. So in the same instance, while I recognize when people mention about things not working in the past, but it might not have worked because we didn't have the resources, the technology to make things work in and of itself. Like finding out about who Sylvia was, you know, 20 years ago would be really hard. But here it is within 3 weeks, even though I've known Sylvia for a while through my posters and everything, but now she can just access a platform where she can reach like 100 people. So we really have to think about what we have presently that could make a difference now compared to 20 and some odd years ago, as well as document what we're doing now so other generations learn from our mistakes and what we've accomplished, right?
Good stuff. Anyone else want to add to that comment in regards to, you know, are Black Canadians ready to invest in regards to the initiative? Go ahead.
I think I think there are very many Black organizations now, or even Black individuals that are, personally willing to engage and willing to invest. And also, I think part of our responsibility now is to build in sustainability in all these initiatives. So even when we are helping organizations access this 25 million or whatever amount of funding, in our programming, we should build in something that makes sure that these organizations, these initiatives that we are doing, are able to, to self-sustain after the funding runs out. Because at the end of the day, we should be making, whether it is government funding or private corporation funding, we should be factoring it in and making sure that we are investing in things that will last beyond the 2 years funding, beyond the 5-year funding, because if a program is built in the community, we should, as a basic responsibility for ourselves, be able to make sure that it is sustainable. But in a short answer to that question is yes, I think Black people are ready now in this 2019 to invest in our own communities and make sure that our programs are sustainable.
Anyone
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, and I guess the only thing that I would add into is, like, we can think about it from the perspective that we are already investing too, right? Because I think there's a range about what might be under that heading about investing. I think we might go to thinking about monetary, which I think some folks have done, but even like time and expertise. I mean, there's an valuing of what those contributions are. And again, as they have come together to kind of situate where we are. And then I think the other piece is that we'll be better situated to be more specific about what we're asking folks to become engaged in as well, like as we go forward with the structure that we've been imagining and working towards in the last bit and talking about in these conversations. So, so I think that there's a piece that is a recognition that commitment is already showing up in a variety of ways, that investment, the word that we've used, and that in the go forward with the structures that are in place, and as other people acknowledged are learning from other times, I think we'll kind of to a success in that as well. And the over-reliance or the reliance on maybe government funding, I think is something that we should recognize as well. And I'm probably going to sound like a record that's got the needle stuck in the groove, but the government money that is for programs that in this case we're talking about in terms of decade funds, it is for us. So it is okay for us to demand the access to it, right? And at the same time, like saying to ourselves, we have our own capacity. As we grow capacity, we'll be able to do more as well. Like we'll be like, say, I know we're going to talk about the chamber as well and things like that, but we'll be putting funds back into our organizations and into our community as we continue to do these things. So there are those things happening as well. So it's like, again, it's not kind of one or the other, but it's a recognizing of our opportunity place in the various things that are available and that exist.
Okay, thank you so much. Just want to come back. Robin Brown has come back with another comment on the YouTube platform. And I think maybe Soraya, maybe he's asking you to answer this the best you can. He's asking again, what about the capacity of the FBC at this point to be that institution or the Michelle John Foundation? So I guess he's at, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I would say on that is that we need to stay away from centralized organizations. And I'm saying this as somebody who comes from the Michaëlle Jean Foundation, right? I think it's important for us to diversify who represents us, because we, as a community, we are diverse. And so as much as, yes, it's okay to come as a unit with a unified voice, it's also okay to work with different organizations that work, in different sectors to better represent us at all levels, right? Because I do not know, maybe the Federation of Black Canadians might but I can speak for the Michael Jean Foundation. Based on our mandate, we work with the arts and with the youth. We do have the National Black Canadian Summit, which is a meeting point, and that's becoming an annual meeting point for people from all backgrounds within the Black community to come and discuss. But I think it's important as well to have different organizations. It's also an exercise of empowering medium to large organizations, or small to large and medium organizations to become large organizations who are able to do that. Because when I think about the Chamber of Commerce for immigrants, for African immigrants in Quebec, their name was also put forward to become that intermediary organization. And I think it's not a bad thing because they do focus on economic prosperity among the Black community. So as much as I do understand the need to have a unified voice, it's also important to keep in mind that we are diverse, that we work, not that we work in different ways, but that people from different backgrounds within the Black community operate from different perspectives, and it's okay to represent those different perspectives as well. Now, would those different organizations might come together and create an advisory board or council or something of that matter, or ally with maybe the Federation of Black Canadians to centralize the voice or the voices, maybe. But in the meantime, when we're talking about intermediary models, because 25, especially when we talk about this specific project, 25 million is a lot of money for just one organization to manage, in terms of transparency, in terms of capacity, in terms of, different allocation as well. It's important to diversify it. So I get that the Federation of Black Canadian might come, has the capacity to do that, or even the Michael Jean Foundation, but I think now it's okay for us to think about, diverse groups or diverse organizations that could help us do that.
Anyone want to add that what was said there? Because I appreciate your comments, Soraya, but then the thing is, if there isn't some centralized body, can this be as effective as it can be? Right? Because I just want to get other people's input, Soraya, on this, because, and I hear where you're coming from. You don't want to have everything in a central place, but if it's not centralized, are we able to take advantage of this opportunity to the best ability? So, Robert, I think you have something you want to say.
Yeah, well, I think Soraya has a good point, right? I'm glad that she, despite her affiliation with Michael Jean Foundation, that she's willing to say that, because it goes back to what Sylvie was mentioning about there's regional concerns that someone on the ground in Halifax would know that someone in Montreal would have no clue of. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they can administer funds based on certain reasons that are more like Ottawa centric or Montreal centric or Toronto centric, and they have no type of knowledge of how things could be should be administered in Halifax, right? And then so there's a regional bias that comes into play when only one central body has all the money and they're dictating where it should go, because they're thinking about what they are thinking about, what they deem important. And also, so there's a regional bias that could come into play that I think that Soraya is trying to circumvent. And then there's also political as well as a social political bias that people have. So if you're an organization that is mostly dealing with bureaucrats and large scale organizations, you might not fully be aware of the small needs of a grassroots organization that has 5 members, but has a reach on Facebook or in the community, or a credibility in community that's pretty vast, right? So I think and a person, an organization that's smaller would know about the organizations that have credibility in the community, and the ones that really need to be empowered, more so than the Michael Jean Foundation, just because of where they're located, right? And their mandate, right? So I think Soraya's on point with that.
Okay. Anyone else want to add on to the comments that Robert and Soraya have made? Susan?
The only thing I can think about on this is at the risk of sounding like a broken record. I think what is going to keep us back, or keep some of these organizations back that would have been ideal to address the regional concerns or grassroots concerns, is lack of accountability and transparency. I think this is a great time for all our organizations to put these measures in place, because we need to make sure that our regional organizations, our small, medium, and even large organizations have transparency and have the trust of the community. Because part of the problem is that the community we serve needs to be, able to trust that our organizations are, good to put forward, for lack of a better word. So I think this is, even as this process unfolds, whether it ends up to be 2 or 3 or 4 large organizations, it gives us an opportunity for each organization where it is at to start looking at our internal structures. I know that with ADAT, we are putting forward a system called an accountability system to just really have not to call out organizations that you've been bad or whatever, but to recognize that organizations in the communities that are doing a great job, that are the trust of the community. And as we go forward, even as this year passes and we have more funds to deal with, or going forward, I think it's very important for each and every organization, big or small, to build in that accountability and transparency structure. In which case, when this next conversation comes around, then we would be able to really pinpoint organization A, B, and C, and have everybody have their full trust that these organizations can deliver on the promises.
Excellent. On the YouTube platform, Ann Clark is saying, though, she disagrees. She says the Canadian Race Relations Foundation began with a $20 million budget when it was created by an act of parliament. And also Doug Minter from the good friend Doug Minter said, sounds like organizations by region should be chosen to overcome the negative effects of biases. But Ann Clark is saying that she feels that it could be a central. Now, Sylvia, you're probably our best historian on the on our conversation today. What do you have to respond in regards to Ann saying that the Canadian Race Relations Foundation began with $20 million when it was created by an act of parliament?
Mm-hmm. So I'm not 100% sure of the growth stability of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation at this point. So
Right.
I'm not sure if that comment was to affirm that type of structure or not. But the idea of having some place, I think, in some structure way, I guess, of being the place where you would go to gather information. I think maybe we need a redefining of centralized, right? Because I don't necessarily feel like that's that far away from it, because we're talking about some kind of structure, and what it exists to this point in terms of concept is this institute that would have kind of either regional arms or thematic connections, things like that. So what I'm saying is that if there's this place which might kind of meet to the thinking of centralized, where you go and say, okay, we need data collected, we need that analysis, and anything that we need that is to Black Canadians, it goes through this place. This place is not necessarily a one body, Ottawa, Halifax, or whatever, Calgary, whatever, Quebec, Montreal, like located in that way. I mean, that kind of thing is still trying to get completed in terms of a framework of discussion. But the if we even maintain our thinking from the intent is there is this understanding that if you're talking about things about Black community, about us, then you get that information from us, right? So that is the idea about this whole concept of this the Canadian Institute kind of whatever. So as you can hear from the way I'm talking, we are still kind of trying to talk it through. What I think we're trying to avoid, and it might speak to one of the questions I said about an organization that maybe didn't succeed in the way that we thought it should have succeeded, is we're maybe in some way speaking to that, right? Whatever. What is our way forward that has this right mix of kind of being able to filter through or be directed to. But I think this thing about raising up themes and regions and a kind of a / combination is a worthwhile continuing planning conversation for us, because that will still get us to, if you've got a question about us, if you need something done that relates to us, we've got a place for you to go through, right? That's really the kind of the intent of it. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Sylvia, for that. And for people that are watching on the Get Vocal platform and on YouTube, I've just put a link for you to click on to provide your feedback and suggestions on future conversation topics you'd like us to host. If you could do that, that would be appreciated and not taken for granted. So as we're starting to wind down, this has been a really quick conversation. It's gone right quick, right fast, but that's really good. I want to take a look now in regards to, and I think it comes, one of the comments I've heard during this conversation was really interesting, how Robert said there are a lot of people on the ground level that are not being, we have to get the ground level involved. Have you, anyone want to talk about here, and I think Susan's mentioned, have you noticed more Black organizations like saying what's going on, what can we get to move our organizations forward? Or is it the same that you've seen during your journey, or do you see a new energy in regards to wanting to create opportunities for Black Canadians in our country right now? Anyone want to provide feedback on that?
I think there's a lot of organizations that are kind of small organizations that are kind of feeling like they are left outside of the big conversation. So people want to jump into the conversation, and we need to get a little bit better in how, and this is part of the growing pains, part of what we are trying to do, is really to let these small organizations know that they have a voice, to find a way to get this information to get out to these small organizations, because there's a lot of small organizations all across the country that are doing tremendously good work in their communities, but a lot of times this work is duplicated, and we tend to work because the Black community in Canada is not homogeneous. We have different groups, Francophones, Anglophones, people from the Caribbean, people from continental Africa, people from even continental Africa, from the east, from the west, people, the natives that are here. So there's a lot of organizations that are feeling like maybe sometimes they feel like they are not heard, their voices are not heard. So we are going to need going forward, and this is where the regional and small representation comes in handy. But there's a lot of organizations that want to be in. They want to raise their voices and participate, but they don't know where to start. So part of the leadership is going to need to find a way to get all these voices on the table so that people feel included. Like, for example, for this conversation, I know I'm going to, even now I know my phone is buzzing because my Francophone brothers and sisters are going to say they could not participate. But this is also where we want everybody, like everybody who knows everybody, every organization, because this is all community work and everybody is doing it on their own time. We want more people to come in. Feel free to send an email, send a text. And then we will, and it is our responsibility for the people who are in the room, who are on these tables, to make sure that the information, whatever information we have, to the best of our abilities, gets disseminated to these small organizations.
Soraya, are you noticing more activity on the ground level?
Whatever you mind asking that question, please.
I'm just saying that. Are you seeing more activity on the ground level in regards to?
Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was going to say absolutely, and I think that comes from this. Not to be too large in my response, but just to say, I think it's because of the rise of consciousness just recently. I think for the past 5 years that became mainstream, so a lot of people are willing to participate, but there's a disconnect, right? A lot of people, they don't know where to start. They don't know how to contribute or who to talk to. But yes, definitely there are more people taking it upon themselves to work and do the work that's needed. But what's happening is that's just creating or perpetuating the mini silos. So people are just working in silos instead of having that I don't always want to say unified voice, because I think the reason why I'm saying this, maybe that question is I don't know if it's okay with you if I answer it in French, just to make sure that que les gens qui sont francophones ils participent également. Que par exemple les personnes francophones, c'est très difficile pour elles de participer dans certaines conversations comme celle-ci, parce que des fois il n'y a pas un vocabulaire ou il n'y a pas un espace pour elles. Mais je crois qu'il y a définitivement cette volonté, cette capacité de vouloir continuellement travailler pour faire partie de la conversation. Donc, oui, au niveau local, donc à ground level, je vois qu'il y a ce changement, cette volonté de participer.
Okay. Anyone else want to add in regards to that? Are they seeing more ground level? And on top of that, how can we? I think it's a great point that Soraya brought out. How do we break the silos?
Well, I think maybe with these funding that we have to not.
Can I add one thing?
No, okay. Soraya, just hold on. Robert was in first. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, she can add on, but what she was going to say.
Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, what I was just about to say is that I think the one thing that we have to realize and be truthful about ourselves about is the fact that there are some organizations that kind of push their way in the front, and they don't provide any. There's very little room for organizations, small organizations, to kind of push themselves between these people. Right. And oftentimes when these funding come out for like $25 million, $1 million here, $1 million there, these same organizations are like right there to get the money. But I fail to know like what they're doing on the ground, really. Right. Because they might get funding for like millions of dollars, but the average Black person on the ground really doesn't know them. And I don't know how effective they've been in the past, but I really think that there should be room for other voices, because those other voices could be more effective than just the traditional voices that you hear, and they might have a fancy name, but in reality, like, what have they done to really concretely move the Black agenda forward outside of just having white people pay more attention to us, right? So we really have to have a multifaceted approach as far as I'm concerned, right?
Okay. Soraya? Soraya, are you with us?
Hello?
Yes, Soraya, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add a component to your question and say, how do we break the cycle of working in silos in order for us to see more representation at the national level, right? Because when we work in silos, it's for example, I don't know, somebody, people from Quebec, for example. A lot of times we talk about how there's a lack of representation of francophone in those conversations, parce que justement, au Québec, c'est pas seulement au Québec, mais les francophones, on a une autre façon de travailler. On travaille, we work differently, right? But comment est-ce qu'on s'assure que les petits groupes qui se créent, so how do we make sure that, you know, it's okay to, I don't like the term silo, it's okay to work for specific issues, but how do we make sure that we broaden that conversation to include more people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my part of the, I don't know if that question was clear, but essentially, I don't see anything, I'm not against working in silos, because a lot of times there are specific issues that are pertaining to specific communities that need to be tackled by those specific communities. But how do we make sure that while we're doing that, we're having a broader conversation? And in that broader conversation, those specific issues are also reflected. So yeah, that's really an open-ended question. It's not something I have the answer for right now, but I'm just saying it's something we also always at all times need to keep in mind.
Sylvia, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah. I mean, so for the kind of the piece about like invitation from a national perspective, kind of whatever. So I think to Robert's point around technology piece and stuff, I mean, I know that there is, I'm not sure exactly what stage it's in. I think it's in some platform development, but like a website, right? So where you can go, you can like share things, you can get information. So in terms of that is something that kind of also came out of the meeting is how do we find ways to have people know what's going on and have their own accountability in that, right? So it's not like you didn't tell me, like, here's where you can find out the information, and it's whomever's responsibility to share that and keep it up to date. But I just wanted to try to give kind of a quick example for something here that's in terms of us that might speak to this question too. So in Nova Scotia, we have the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent Coalition. And so it's comprised of organizations. We have kind of sector conversations, justice, community services, health, education, all those different areas. So the issue around street checks, right, as so we all know across the country, been dealing with carding and street checks. I know are not the same thing, but they're similar in how we have a conversation about the disproportionality of them and the particularly in home in terms of Black males. So, but what we tried to do in terms of inviting many voices into that conversation is this coalition set up a phone line where that was happening, I think weekly for, tried to share that information out through our various network sharing so that people could call in, could ask questions. If there was something requested, like, can you have the police chief there? We could say, yeah, the police chief is going to be here on this particular date, whatever. So I think it's thinking about ways in solution, finding approaches as much as possible and giving the information. I used to say when I was teaching to my students, if I'm working harder on this than you are, there's a problem. So we need to find the balance of, like, we need to be accountable and share things out, but we need to make it easy for people, as easy as we can, for people to take on their level of responsibility that they can take and become engaged. And so in this case it's whatever, I'll make up the dates. Wednesday from 9 to 9:30 was when this was available. Like I said, we used as many networks as possible to make sure the number was available, and it would just be there. And it would always be happen whether people didn't call in or not. So I think things like that allow for that collaborative accountability for our learning is things we want to try to do and scale them up nationally.
Okay, good stuff. As we're winding down here, I'm going to ask everyone for some closing comments. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for jumping in. I'll give the final stuff at the end, but thanks for everyone for hanging on, coming into the conversation. So I want each person who's on live here to give their message in regards that they want to share with the audience right across Canada, especially Black Canadians. What is their message, their parting message in regards to getting Black organizations to take advantage of opportunity? So first up, I'll have Soraya, your final comments.
My final comment really is to maybe continuously when we think about, and I think it's about, I like the question about, what needs to be done in order to get Black Canadians to get advantage of opportunities is also creating opportunities for ourselves and for the community as well. So what I mean by that is, so that's the first question and the last question when we were talking about working in silos. So it's okay to want to work with a specific group of people, but sharing the information and making sure that information is available to everyone on all platforms, and as well as meeting people where they are. Because a lot of times, and I want to have this conversation through an intergenerational lens, is that the conversation or the information is not made available to our elders. Sometimes they have the recipe for success, but they don't know what's being made available for them to actually apply that recipe. And a lot of times that goes back to working in silos and not making sure that there's a one point or a one platform where we can all go and get those information. So that's one part of my comment. The second part is that goes back to when we were talking about who should be best. Should we think about the Federal Black Canadian or the Michaël Jean Foundation or any other type of group organization that would fit the criteria to represent the Black community? Is that can be done while also there are specific groups that are targeting different or specific issues as well, right? So what we need to think about is to, I want to say, create a platform. I think that's been said a lot of times, but create a platform where we can all go and input our suggestions around how we want to work together to prevent not enough voices being heard or being represented. So that's what I would add as a comment. Donc, merci de m'avoir invité. C'était vraiment une conversation assez ouverte et qui permet, je pense, qu'on finit par briser les barrières autour de différents modes de fonctionner. Donc, thank you for inviting me. I think that's a conversation that's going to help contribute to continue to break down the barriers around coming together and having those conversations and I think that the goal behind this is actually for us to continue to have those conversations on an open platform. So thank you for contributing to that.
Good stuff. Next up, Robert Small.
Yeah, I think that we just have to keep on pushing forward, right? As well as thinking about our collective, some of the things that are of our collective interest. Per se, everybody's not going to be against the summer program for Black youth. And way back in the day in Ontario, there used to be a Jobs Ontario youth program that specifically aimed at Black youth. So if we were looking at doing something like that federally, that it was a summer Black program for youth, and it was administered differently in Halifax, Vancouver, Toronto, but we got federal funding from it, and we got like 5 different these 10 organizations that are part of the Meeting of the Minds to just apply for the funding as one collective group. I don't see why that wouldn't happen, right? So if you had 5 collective groups or 10 collective groups from different parts of the country, all asking for federal money to be administered to these individual organizations, but all these 10 working together as one collective group, I can't see how that wouldn't pay dividends in the future. So I think we just have to be more future-minded, think more collectively, also recognize that we have individual interests in individual regions that we have to cater towards, and just realize that the Black community, like any other community, whether you're marketing a shoe or any product, you have to market like Black empowerment to them in a way that they'll understand. A lot of times, you're trying to market things like Black history or Black ingenuity or whichever to a community, and you're assuming just because they're Black that they should do it. But similar to buying any product or convincing anybody, you have to market it to them to make them understand that this is in your best interest. And sometimes we overlook that, and then our organizations fail or our initiatives fail. But it's not because the initiative is bad. It's not because the staff was bad. It was just the execution of it to the community was, right? And we just have to realize that, understand that, and just look back at our mistakes and try to rectify it.
Next up, Sylvia.
So on my electronic signature, I have the word Ubuntu, and which, just generally, so it's my success is your success. So I think in terms of kind of how we go forward, I would encourage us to think in that way, so we find ways to support each other in small and scaled up ways, and that we have a collective unity, which, again, to pull from what some other people said, it's not like we're always all on the same page, but we're all going in the same direction. And we know ourselves as Black Canadians, as community. We understand ourselves with our own regional uniqueness. We understand ourselves across the diaspora. So we're focused on that. And so what we do and how we define and move forward our success is in that regard. And to trust that, this respectful, friendly, what they call that, the friendly critic or friendly critic, things like that, are welcomed in terms of the conversation, because if we have on the center of the table and are thinking in a relational way that we're all going forward to strengthen our Black communities across the country, then we're just going to be solution finding and getting it right.
Excellent. And we'll leave the final comments to Ms. Susan.
First, I want to say thank you, Dr. Vibe, for hosting this conversation. As always, this is a great beginning for us as a people to find ways of, if nothing else, to talk about these issues. But I think in terms of going forward, really, we have, if there's only one word that I could drum up, it will be collaboration. As much as we can, in going forward, we should be looking for ways where we can always work together, or even if it's not on the whole thing, but there should be a way that I can work together with another organization in Ottawa doing the same thing, because at the end of the day, we are, like everybody has said, we are moving in the same direction, but we are also serving the same people. So we should be finding ways of saying yes to working together, yes to sharing resources. Most of the things that my organization is trying to do, some organization around the country has done. So instead of spending the limited resources and time trying to reinvent the wheel, we should be looking for those opportunities. And I think as we go ahead and find these ways, and as we go ahead and do things like these conversations or finding ways to collaborate, I think we will get there. And I know you did, and I'm just gonna wind up by saying, I think you did, Dr. Vibe, share the link for conversations like this. So we like to host these conversations once a month. And if Dr. Vibe has shared the link for a survey, so that folks can let us know what other things you want us to talk about. I know we were supposed to talk about the chamber today. We didn't get there. We will get there on another conversation down the road. But please let us know what you want to hear. We want also to make sure that some of the conversations we are having are lighter, so that we can get more people engaged. But again, like usual, Dr. so much for opening up this platform and hosting such a good conversation.
Well, thank you so much. And we have one or two more things we got to do. And I want to make sure I get this last question in for the panel to respond to. And it is from Robin Brown. And Mr. Brown is asking, are there any Black groups that have managed to make themselves truly diverse, including LGBTQ, low-income, and Francophone Black members? Is there any? Does anyone know any organization of that out there right now?
No.
Okay. Sylvia?
So not in terms of, so I'm going by people self-identifying, right? In terms of how, whatever, and there's that. So So yeah, so certainly within the coalition that I mentioned earlier, we do have identification in terms of LGBT. There would be folks who are bilingual, but maybe and some of that is in terms of Acadian French, which is in a Nova Scotia way. So we would have that component, but I'm not sure if that would answer Robin's query in that regard.
No problem. Yourself, Susan, do you know any organization that covers all those groups?
Not off the top of my head. No, I don't.
Okay. No problem. And I would be remiss because
Sorry.
Go ahead, Robert.
I don't think that's necessarily a negative, right? Because we're a diverse community, right? You know, so even within the LGBTQ community, there's diverse people within that, right? That are Black. You know, so even there, you'd have different people that can form individual groups, and there are individual organizations in Toronto that serve as that community, but that have different interests. So I think it might sound, you know, very good to have such an organization, but in the application of what that organization would essentially stand for, it might become problematic because even if that group was existent, there'd be so many varying interests that it would just be so general. It wouldn't be of any use to anybody, right?
Okay. I'd be remiss if any of you want to provide your contact information to continue the conversation with any of our viewers live or on replay, because I always want to promote yourself. So let's see. First off, Robert, do you want to give your contact information?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Robert Small, for those who don't know. And I'm an artist, and I create a poster every year, and I've been doing so for the past 25 years, called the Legacy Poster. You know, some of the images are on this shirt right here.
Right there, that's why.
And this is purely by accident, right? That I got on this call because I just dialed in, I seen the slot, and I said, hey, I'll take it, right? So I'm really not supposed to be one of these hosts, you know? Right? But needless to say, I'd appreciate the support across the country because that's what I've been trying to do. I'm in the process of writing an initiative for the Meeting of the Minds and this $25 million to create products like this shirt, and have all the Meeting of the Minds logos on the back, and everybody, you know, supporting it. But also, you know, it wouldn't just be my shirt. It would be shirts that an artist can create from Halifax, and then everybody selling across the country. Then the following year, Nova Scotia, Vancouver, and going on like that. So then we're all promoting everybody from different regions, you know. So that's what I'm presently working on right now. But you can look up my website, which is www.thelegacyposter.com.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sylvia Barras.
Yeah, so I'm with the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute with multiple focuses. The key areas are Afrocentric education resources and research. Our website is dbdli.ca, and you'll see our resources, our strategic plan, and a lot of things that we're doing with youth and young adults. So I would appreciate feedback when you see materials there, and some advice about what we should look to try to develop through our publishing arm. We're obviously focused on Nova Scotia curriculum, but we also have lifelong learning. So we have resource development that we can do for community, and so that community can be regional, local, or across the country. So I'd welcome feedback on that one.
Wonderful. Susan?
Today I'm wearing the African Diaspora Action Team hat, and so if you follow the link for the survey that Dr. Vado put out there, that is, and you fill in that would come to us. So EDAT is really a loose group of individuals that are really focused on action around the Black space. And you know, we'll be hosting the next conversation, I think September 15th.
Wonderful. So here's a question I have for everyone before we leave. I just got another question in. I don't know if you guys have time to address it, or do we save it for our next conversation? How are the timelines for everybody?
I feel like I should be off So I'm
Okay.
not sure. You know, do you want to try the question?
I'm gonna try it. It's a heavy question,
Oh,
but I'm gonna, so if you accept it, you know you got it's like let's make a deal. You got to accept. You gotta accept what's behind the door.
In your estimate, will it take 5 minutes or 25 minutes?
oh,
This
Is
is
it
a
time-
25.
okay.
See the 20. It's a
Oh.
25-minute question. It could, in fact, I think it's a conversation all by itself. So, I'm Mr.
Okay.
Doug Minter. I'm gonna leave that for when you come on this because you're giving the question. So after we go offline, I'll give our participants the question and they'll say, yeah, it's probably a 25-hour question. So we're going to leave it at
Oh,
that.
okay.
Let's leave it there.
All right. I would like
Let's leave
to
it
thank,
there.
I'd like to thank Susan. I'd like to thank Sylvia. I'd like to thank Robert. I'd like to, she has left, so Soraya has left us. I'd like to thank everyone who came on the Get Vocal platform. We had Amber. We had Alex. We had Tony Davis, who just jumped on. Also, we had Richard Sharp, who's now hopefully driving safely in a car from Ottawa to Toronto with his son, Guelph, to enroll his younger one. And a few last comments here from the YouTube platform. Ann Clark says, groups come together based on need and shared values. Once that value is finished, they might disband, so silos are okay. How outreach is done by larger organizations is key. And then another gentleman who I've never met, who I've spoken with a few times, Brian Johnson, runs an organization called Black Boys Code, would like to establish a chapter in Halifax and Ottawa. We are in search of a part-time chapter leader in the cities. These are paid positions. If anyone's interested, or if you know anyone that's interested, please email info@blackboyscode.org. Just want to thank people who jumped in on YouTube. We had Robin Brown, we had Ann Clark, we had Doug Minter from Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce jumped in, Brian Johnson and others. Thank you so much for helping making this an epic conversation. Please keep on track. The next one's going to be September 15th. I am Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of epic conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. If you want to find out any more information, just put in the DRVIBESHOW.com and you'll get all the information you need. I'd say thank you so much. God bless. Peace be well. Walk good. And people who are live on Get Vocal, we'll do an after show. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay. See you later.
Goodbye.
bye.
Goodbye.